take a moment and just allow your eyes to close. And allow yourself a moment to just go within. There's always noise, smells, sounds, sensations in the outer world. You close your eyes, it removes the sight, but there's all of the other sensations. And then of course there's the fluctuations in our own brain that we call thoughts. There's so much to distract us. But allow yourself to cultivate the habit of being able to drop deeply, even amidst the noise, amidst the smells, amidst the sensations. And as you draw the awareness to your breath, draw it not up in your chest, up in your rib cage, not there, but draw that awareness deeply and low in your abdomen. Allow yourself to ground and anchor yourself as low in the abdomen as you can, as the breath flows in and flows out. drawing your inhalations from that place low in the abdomen, about 2 inches below your navel, called the Swadhisthana chakra. It's the energy center at the seat of yourself. Swadhisthana in Sanskrit literally means the place of the self. So allow the breath to come into that energy center and allow yourself to drop back down into that center, holding the awareness anchored in the breath. If the mind wanders, don't worry. Don't get mad at it. Don't yell at it. Don't tell yourself a story about it. Just gently bring it back to the breath as it flows in and out of that core of the self, at that Swadhisthana chakra. Slowly and gently, bring the palms of your hands together in Namaste at chest level. And just gently rub the palms of the hands against each other. Gently press the palms of your hands into your closed eyes. Slowly lower the hands and open your eyes. Welcome. Welcome to Satsang. So back in our cozy dry room. The weather forecast says from tomorrow the rain is going to stop, so we'll be back in the garden. If anybody ever doubted climate change, this middle of March rain should convince them. In India, the rain patterns have always been really, really, really predictable. And I'm not talking hundreds of years ago, I'm talking 20 years ago. When I first came to India 27 years ago, and for the first several years I was here, it was like clockwork. Monsoon started middle of Jan, ended mid-September. It was like Jan 15th to September 15th was the rain. We'd always have 2-3 days of rain that would hit sometime in the winter, usually January, which was the time that you knew, oh my God, now it's going to be really cold. Typically the winters are dry, but you'd get this unseasonal winter rain that would turn it from being cold but beautiful, dry, blue sky, sunny days into this like in your bones cold for 2 or 3 days. And then it would stay cold with the fog, but the rain wouldn't be there. And then we pretty much didn't have rain again until June. Every once in a while, a rare fluke of a day in May, it would come early or something. But this heavy rain February, heavy rain March, it was unheard of. So it's beautiful in that I love the rain, and it's considered very, very auspicious in Indian tradition. But of course, when you live in a place where you're so connected to the cycles of nature and the cycles of farming, this is the time that's so bad for farmers to have rain. It's the time where, due to the rain, so many farms end up without their crops, without their yields. And so that which is just a very mild inconvenience to the rest of us ends up actually becoming a major, major, major crisis for a lot of people. And it was something that for me, before coming to India, I had never thought about. And then suddenly you're in a place where you're living interwoven with the cycles of planting and harvesting, and farmers who are relying on, traditional means of farming, and relying on the weather to be dry when it's supposed to be dry and wet when it's supposed to be wet, and not the opposite. So we bow to the rain as the flow of Mother Goddess from the sky. We say Akash Ganga, the Ganga from the sky, but we say a prayer for our sisters and brother farmers, that their crops and their yield may stay healthy and robust. So as always, starting with a question from our online internet-based family, and then we'll open it up to any questions that anyone here has. If I am drawn to seek self-realization, and I feel like the life of the world is not for me, and it is making me suffer, does that mean I need to renounce and become sannyasi? I have been interested every day in spiritual activities for years. And this is asked by Pauline Vincentelli. So you don't renounce the world and become a monastic because the world is making you suffer. Monasticism is not a way out of suffering. It is not the path of, oh my God, I'm so fed up. My job, my family, my neighbors, my house payments, my responsibilities, my family members, whatever it may be. Renunciation is not the answer to being fed up. The answer to being fed up is spiritual practice, right where you are, in the family, in the job. Because the same nature that makes you fed up there is going to make you fed up here. Because it isn't actually that particular person, a husband, a wife, a mother-in-law, a boss, a colleague. You know, we blame them. But it's not actually them. It's our internal nature that gets triggered. And so the solution to suffering is not monasticism. The solution to suffering is spiritual practice, meditation, japa, seva, yoga, reading of spiritual scriptures. That's the solution. Running away isn't gonna help you do anything. When we make an important decision in life, it's important to ask yourself, are you running from or are you running to? Decisions that are made where we are running from, almost always, not 100% of the time, but almost always, are not decisions that lead to great fruit. Because the truth is, what we're running from is not actually a situation or a person. It's our own reaction to that person. The person is just a person. Your husband or your wife or your in-laws or your boss, they're just people. They're just doing their thing. Presumably there's other people who can live with them. Right? I mean, they haven't been murdered yet. Other people are able to cross paths with them without running away or killing them or killing themselves. So it's not the person. It's not the situation. It's your reaction to it. Your internal triggering by it and then reaction to it. And that all happens in your mind. The person is out there, living their life, doing their thing, engaged in their own karmic process. It's in your mind that all of that annoying, intolerable, obnoxious, want to run away from behavior is happening. I'm not saying that you don't have any reason to be annoyed. I'm not saying that what they're doing is perfect and right and okay and that you're crazy to think that they're obnoxious. Maybe they are. Maybe they're objectively obnoxious. But that doesn't mean that you need to be triggered. Certain situations in life are difficult. It doesn't mean that you need to react to them. It just means it's a difficult situation. But that's why we actually meditate. On the most basic level, on the deepest and highest level, of course, we do it to experience self-realization, God realization, truth, oneness, moksha. But on the very basic level, kind of the fundamental first aspects of meditation, is that I should learn to control my own mind. I should learn to stop being a slave of my own mind. Just because a donut's there doesn't mean I have to eat it. Just because an annoying person is there doesn't mean I have to get angry. But a lot of us take things as though they were inescapable, inevitable. Like my favorite story about this is the story of this guy who, true story, he worked in California at Berkeley University and was the friend of a spiritual teacher there who tells this story, that the teacher decided, not the spiritual teacher, the teacher at the university, decided to go on a diet because his doctor told him he was eating too much junk food and getting overweight and his numbers were all off. And so he tells his friend, the spiritual teacher, that he's going to go on a diet, get healthy. And he says, but the problem is that every single day I take the bus to work, and where I get off the bus, there's this pastry shop. And every day I find myself with a bag full of pastries sitting at my desk first thing in the morning eating them. And he says, and every day I say, today I'm not going to buy pastries. And every day I find myself with a bag full of pastries at my desk. And so his friend, the spiritual leader, says, why don't you leave your wallet at home? And the guy says, what? He says, you want me to steal them? And it's such a great story because it's so indicative of the way our brains work. Like the idea that I could actually walk past the pastry shop is inconceivable. So either I have my wallet and I buy them, or I don't have my wallet, meaning I steal them. Because we see things as inescapable. Pastry shop, you eat pastries. Temptation, you give in. In the same way, when we have annoying people, difficult situations, things that make us suffer, we feel like it's standard. Of course I'm going to suffer. Inconceivable that I could be in this situation and not suffer. Inconceivable that I could stay in relationship with this person and not suffer. Inconceivable that I could have this person as a colleague in my workplace and not suffer. It never occurs to us that there actually is an alternative. Other than changing your job, divorcing your spouse, running away. That there's actually an internal option. That you could stay in the job, stay in the marriage, stay in the situation. And of course, I'm not talking about situations that are actually abusive. I'm talking about the run-of-the-mill stuff of human life that annoys us, bothers us, causes us to suffer. If you're being physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused, get out. But for most of us, that abuse is actually our own mind doing it. Other people are just doing their thing. Interacting with us as best as they know how, in their own karmic journey, their drama, being who they are in the world. And it's our mind that creates suffering out of that. So monastic life is not the place to run from that. Because then you'll just suffer here. Then you'll find people here who are obnoxious and annoying and situations that bother you. They're everywhere. It's the package of human life. So if you are meant to be a renunciant and you feel like that's really a drive for you, beautiful, wonderful. It's a path I certainly love. It's a path that I recommend to people who are really deeply inclined toward it. But do not do it running away from. Do it as something only if you're pulled toward it. And whether it's monasticism or whether it's anything else, it's a great way to think about decisions. Am I running from or am I running toward? And if you're running from, again, unless it is a threatening situation in which you are being harmed, oppressed, suppressed, exploited in some way. If you are, then run from it. But if not, stay there. Work it out there. Do your sadhana there. Find freedom there. Because that's your karmic package. And only move when you are being called toward something specific. When you are running toward rather than running from. So, Pauline, if you are running toward monasticism because it's what you've always wanted to do, by all means, welcome. But if you think that monasticism is the way out of your suffering in the world, stay there. Do the work. Find an end to your suffering. And then, if you still want to come and be a monastic, then come. Great, thank you. Thank you, Pauline, for that beautiful question. Any questions that anyone here has? Yeah.
Hello. So my name is Nishi. My question is, how do we stay consistent on the spiritual journey without any distractions?
Great. So distractions are always there. Unfortunately, we don't have magic wands to change the world. Can't do that. The external world does not have an on-off button or a volume button. We only have one inside. And that's the power of awareness and mindfulness. And you'll notice, just in this room, it's very interesting. People come in, they sit down. It's not a particularly fascinating thing that's happening. Right? I mean, people are just coming in and sitting down. And yet, everybody's attention goes, right? Human nature. I've watched it happen so many times. Somebody opens up their purse to get something, and it's like nobody's ever heard a zipper before. Everybody goes, it's a zipper. We all know what it sounds like. It's just a zipper. But we are so unable to hold our attention in place. That just a door opening, people quietly coming in and quietly sitting down, and oh my God, he took off his jacket. All the attention goes there. It's why we meditate. It is a training of the mind. You can always tell the meditators from the non-meditators. Because one of the very first things that happens with a meditation practice is you stop reacting to everything. It's not that you never turn your head to look at things, but it's that every tiny sound does not pull your attention. You're able to actually stay focused on what you're doing. You know, if we heard a gunshot, obviously we'd all turn and look at it. But the normal distractions of the normal day, they don't pull us off. So you want to stay consistent. First thing is, stay consistent in your time. Have a daily schedule. Don't be draconian about it. Don't, whip yourself if you are off by 10 minutes or something changes in the day. You've got to also allow yourself to be in the flow of the universe, and in the universe there is change. But have a schedule, and have a schedule that you aim to stick to, and that you mostly do stick to. But again, it's not so rigid that you are stuck. But stick to it. Have a meditation time. Have a time that whatever your spiritual practice includes, meditation, japa, seva, yoga, whatever it may include, fit that into your day. Have a time for it. Don't wait for there to be time. If you wait for there to be time, there will never be time. We are amazing at figuring out how to fill up every spare moment we have. Every moment we have. The universe gives you an extra few minutes, we fill it up. We're great at that. Don't wait for somehow time to just create itself in which you will meditate. Make the time. And put it into your schedule first. What is that time? Build other things around it. And then do it. But when you make that schedule, make sure that you make it in a way that's reasonable. One of the real downfalls for a lot of us on a spiritual path is we're fully energized, really excited, like I'm going to start this path, really full of inspiration. And we set a daily schedule that's pretty much impossible for us to follow, or that requires essentially a personality transplant. And then we don't follow it. And you lose in two ways. Number one, you lose because you didn't follow it and you didn't meditate. But you lose in a much deeper way as well, which is we're constantly redefining ourselves. And so let's say that right now my daily schedule is I get up somewhere between 8:30 and 9, kind of roll out of bed between 8:30 and 9. I get on my phone, I scroll Instagram for a while, and then I go downstairs and I make a cup of coffee and I scroll Instagram some more. And then eventually I get in the shower and have something to eat. And then by that time I realize, oh my God, I'm late for work. And I rush. Eat my breakfast in the car or on the metro, in the Uber, however I get there. And then I decide, I'm going to start on a spiritual practice from tomorrow. I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to meditate for 2 hours. Then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. The next day the alarm goes off at 4, and you hit the snooze button and you go right back to sleep. Now, the dilemma with that is, yes, you missed your meditation, that is also a dilemma. But worse than that, what happens is, you do that enough days in the row. First couple days you'll say, okay, from tomorrow. From tomorrow I'm starting. Tomorrow is the day, 4 a.m. But you do that enough days in the row with the snooze button and not getting up. eventually the mind is going to say, I'm not a morning meditator. Not for me. I don't have it in me. It may even go a step worse and say, there's not much in this meditation thing. I know this guy, he says he meditates and he's cranky all the time. Must be the meditation. And we make up all kinds of new ways of thinking. Now, when I'm saying it to you like this, you understand they're just justifications, they're rationalizations, they're stories. But in our own mind, they actually become new beliefs. Beliefs about ourselves. I'm not a meditator. I don't do things that I set my mind to do. Look, I made a commitment. I can't follow it. You talk to people, you say, I also, I decided I was going to get up to meditate, but don't have it in me. I can't do anything I set my mind to. I always break my resolutions. That's a new identity. And now, you become the type of person who breaks all their resolutions. Now, whatever you resolve to do, even something much more reasonable, the mind already has decided, I'm somebody who doesn't follow through. And so you actually set yourself up for failure on a much deeper level. So make a reasonable daily schedule. You roll out of bed at 8:30 these days, between 8:30 and 9. Decide that from tomorrow you're going to get up at 7. Okay, and you're going to meditate for half an hour. Get that going for a month. After a month, get up at 6:30. Add some mantra jap to it. Add some pranayam to it. Get that going. Start getting up at 6. Meditate for a little bit longer. Slowly, slowly, slowly build it into your day. So that you actually can follow through. Because then again, you get the benefit of the meditation, but you also get the benefit of the mental identity that says, I am someone who does what I commit to doing. And then you set up a pattern for your whole life of resolving to something and doing it. And then you say, I'm the type of person who when I resolve to do something, I do it. And that's the identity you want. Great. Yes.
Ma pranam to Sadhviji and Sadhviji. Basically, my question is very, very, to the, why we call Ma Ganga, not Father Ganga here. Why we call river as a mother? And I just wanted to know your point of views on that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's actually not just in India. I mean, I don't speak dozens of languages, but I speak a few. And wherever you look, we speak about the earth as mother. Mother Earth. Mother Nature. There's something about nature. Ganga's a different reason. We'll come to that. Ganga's actually a goddess before she was a river. So you wouldn't call the mother goddess father in any case. But that's different. But it's interesting because we tend to speak about nature as mother. And I think it's because we associate and identify mothers as the givers of life, the nourishers, the nurturers. Fathers are beautiful, or can be certainly beautiful caretakers. But it's actually on a physical level, it is the mother's womb from which the baby comes. It is the mother's breasts from which the milk comes. So it's literally her body that is birthing, nourishing, nurturing, feeding the child. And so we see nature as that giver of life, that sustainer, that nourisher, that nurturer. Ganga, of course, is mother because she's a goddess. She came on earth in this form of the river just because we're very blessed that King Bhagirath did that very, very, very intense sadhana to bring her down. Do you know the story of Ganga? No? People don't know the story of Ganga? Oh, it's a great story. Okay. So, there was a king named King Sagar. And in those days, the ways that the kings would get more land, conquer more land, was through something called an Ashwamedha Yagna. And that was a ceremony, a ritual through which the king would let a horse loose, and the horse would wander into the neighboring kingdoms. And to the extent that the horse could wander without being captured and return to the king, it meant that that land through which the horse had wandered became now the property of the king who had let loose his horse. Of course, if the horse was captured, no such luck. But if your horse was able to go and roam freely and return freely, you now were the rightful owner of that horse. So King Sagar lets out his horse. It's a long story, but I'll give you a kind of a abbreviated version. So he lets out his horse wanders and wanders and wanders, and eventually his horse ends up at the ashram of a sage. Horse doesn't return. King Sagar gets very worried because it's not just the horse, but it's the dignity, the reputation of the king. I mean, it's considered a massive failing, a sign of weakness, if your horse gets captured and killed. So King Sagar is, feeling very threatened in a way that, my God, what happened to my horse? And so he sends his sons, tens of thousands of them. Chances are they're probably not all his biological sons, but they're referred to as the sons of King Sagar, his army. I'm sure some were his sons. His army out to go and find his horse. So they eventually, finally, after great, great difficulty, they find the horse in this sage's ashram. And they think that the sage has stolen the horse, which of course he has not. But in that aggression and, adrenaline rush and sort of soldier mentality, they decide that the sage has stolen the horse, and they start to taunt him. The sage is meditating. He's lost in meditation. And they taunt him. And finally, the sage, who was unable to be disturbed, but eventually they managed to break his meditation. And he opens his eyes, and the power from his eyes is such that he burns them all to ash. Just from the power of his eyes. So now all of these sons of King Sagar have been burned to ash. So now the horse is gone. Now the army doesn't come back. So naturally King Sagar is really worried. And eventually he gets to know what has happened. And now he is worried because in the Hindu tradition, doing the final rites for your loved one is considered a very, very, very important ceremony. But without a body, or without the ashes of the body, the final rites cannot be performed. And so he doesn't know what to do. They're in the underworld. It's not a place he can access easily. So what he's told is, if you can convince the goddess Ganga to come out of heaven, there is a goddess in heaven named Ganga, and she is the power of liberation. And if you can get her to flow on earth in the form of a river and to flow over their ashes, they will attain liberation. And so he prays and prays and prays and prays and prays, but it's not enough. Then his son prays and prays and prays, spends his whole life prays and prays, not enough. Finally, King Bhagirath, King Sagar's descendant, is this very, very, very intense sadhak, an intense spiritual aspirant, seeker. And he undertakes very, very, very deep sadhana. Very deep, very austere, very powerful. And eventually Ganga. There's so many other stories that go with it in terms of her coming down and then being taken up in Shiva's locks, and we'll share all of the different pieces maybe on different nights. But basically, so she comes onto earth and she flows over them. They attain liberation. But here's the beautiful piece. She stayed. And to me, this is always a really important piece. She came for a job. She came to bring liberation to the fallen sons of King Sagar. But she stayed. And she stayed for us. And that's why we now have this beautiful blessing of having this mother goddess in the form of the river, this power of liberation in the form of the river, here with us. Yeah. Yes. And then you. Yes.
Namaste, Sadhviji.
Stay.
So, my question is, so since you told a spiritual story, so I want to refer my question to those spiritual stories as well. So, in many spiritual stories, in many incidents, even gods have many emotional upheavals. For example, when Sati Devi was burnt into ashes, Lord Shiva went into depression. And there are such instances in Lord Rama's life as well. He went into depression, even in Lord Krishna's lives as well. So when even lords are facing those emotional upheavals, just like humans, then what's the difference between humans and God? Why? Because yoga itself means equanimity. So since their life also went many ups and downs, and they also, just like humans, they cried and they laughed during those emotional upheavals. What's the difference, and what should we learn from those incidents? That's my question.
Great question. So realize that all of these embodiments on earth in form, Bhagwan Ram, Bhagwan Krishna, they came onto earth in form as a human being for a specific purpose. In order to fulfill that purpose, they took the form of humans. It's why, even though we say Lord Krishna's appearance day, we don't so much speak about them being born, but the form was born. Right? I mean, we know who gave birth to the form. Form was born, and form left. There are times, there are places of birth and death. Now, God didn't die, God wasn't born, but this particular form, that human form on earth at that time that was taken purposely, consciously, abides by all of the rules of humans on purpose. It wouldn't make sense for God to come on earth in the form of a human, but then not act like a human. The reason that God comes on earth in that form is due to whatever the darkness was at that time. It's why if you look at the personality of Bhagwan Ram, for example, compared to the personality of Bhagwan Krishna, it's not about human variety. It's because at that time, here was what we needed. We needed Maryada Purush. We needed to have the embodiment of Dharma, of integrity. Bhagwan Ram is here to teach us, what does a perfect son look like? What does a perfect father look like? A perfect husband, a perfect brother, a perfect king? What does Dharma look like in a human body? So that when we are struggling with, oh my God, how do I fulfill Dharma? Like, I'm so human. If all we had were stories of God living a dharmic life, how easy it would be to say, well, that's God. Like, how do I do it as a human? And so we have these examples. This is what it looks like. Ma Sita, what is this example of Dharma in action? As a mother, as a wife, as a queen, as a daughter-in-law. You want to know how to do it? Pick up a copy of the Ramayana. Nobody can say I didn't know how I was supposed to do it. It's a guidebook. It's a tool book. It's not that they were subject to these emotions the way we are. It's in order to teach us. This is what happens when you are going through this. Here's how you respond. Bhagwan Krishna was here to embody that much more mischievous, playful form. The form of the dancer, the flute player, the bringer of joy in that way. The one of the Leela, the Ras Leela. The one to drive the chariot. Different stories to give us different lessons. When we suffer from depression or anger, we lose ourselves in it. What we get from these stories, whether it's the Ramayana, whether it's the Mahabharata, whether it's the Srimad Bhagavatam, whatever we're looking at, whether it's the Shiv Puran, whatever you're reading, these stories give us teachings. Here is how, when God came on earth in form with human characteristics, here's how they did it. And then here's what they are teaching us about that. The messages, the teachings, the ways of life that we are being given are very clear. If you actually read any of these, you won't ask what's different between them and me. Because in reading, you will understand what's different. I don't know anybody who reads the Ramayana who's like, oh yeah, I'm just like Ram. Never met anyone. He says, yeah, that could be my story. Fast forward a few thousand years, that could be me. I would have done exactly the same thing. Because we understand, this is what we aspire to. This is what we aspire to. I don't know anybody who reads the Mahabharata or even just the Bhagavad Gita and who says, oh yeah, I knew that. I could have written that. 700 verses, no problem. I could have done it. Because we understand, this is divine wisdom. But remember, in Bhagwan Krishna's case, the Gita is instructions, essentially from a friend to a friend. Bhagwan Krishna is not speaking to Arjuna than that moment where, in order to convince Arjuna, he shows him his full form. Other than that, it's a best friend to a best friend. Hey, it's okay. In order to give us the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagwan Krishna had to come down in that form, in that human form. He had to become Arjuna's friend. He had to play the role as a buddy. Otherwise, how was he going to end up in the chariot with Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield to give us a timeless scripture? So there's a reason behind all of the stories. But the bottom line for all of it is benefit to us. Benefit to us. They experienced something. Rather than looking at it and saying, oh, well, that's just like me. Ask yourself, okay, if I understand this is God, what's the lesson to me about this particular moment in time? What's the teaching here? What am I supposed to learn here? Why would God on earth go through this? What's the message? Because you realize if God is going to take form on earth, clearly God could take any form. And these are the forms that we've been given. And it's interesting because even when you look at other religions as well, you look at Buddhism. I know they don't necessarily, the Buddha doesn't consider himself an incarnation of God. But, the awakened one, through struggles, through troubles, through seeing the sick person and the dead person and the handicapped person. It's a story of him coming to awakening. You look at the story of Jesus Christ, right? You think God's son, as some people understand him, or actually God as others understand him, coming on earth. In Hinduism, we speak about many different avatars, the Vishnu avatars. In Christianity, it's just once. And yet, in that one time, what do you have? A story of struggle. Whenever God comes on earth, what you see is a story of struggle. And yet, you think, well, God is God. Theoretically, therefore, God has the power to come down not in struggle. But if these are the stories that we keep being given across religions, across peoples, it is to give us messages and teachings about life and struggle. And that if even God on earth in form goes through struggle, that struggle is a part of the human package. Otherwise, people feel like, oh my God, I'm a good person, I pray, I do my japa, I do my seva, I write a check to my temple once a month. Like, why is all of this bad stuff happening to me? If every time God came on earth it was all just sunshine and flowers, then you'd have a valid question. But you say, well, God, even when God comes on earth, it's nothing but struggle. Because it's the package deal of life. And they have shown us the way out of the suffering, not the way out of the package. Troubles will always be there, but the way out of the internal suffering. Good. Yeah, last. We'll take this as the last question.
Hello. A few years ago, I watched a documentary about Buddhist monks who were acting very violently towards Muslim community. So my question is, how can violence can be justified in spiritual community and not only?
It's a beautiful question. It's a challenging question. And it's a question that we come upon from the scriptures into today. The Bhagavad Gita is spoken in a battlefield. 700 verses of God telling Arjuna to fight this war. The Bhagavad Gita begins with Arjuna saying, forget it, I don't want to fight. And Bhagwan Krishna says, no such luck. Yes, you will. And it's something that a lot of us struggle with. Why is God condoning violence? And the teaching comes, and I'm not necessarily saying this about the current situation, but when we look at scripturally condoned violence, it is to prevent worse violence. The situation at that time was that those who were currently in charge of the kingdom, the cousins of Arjuna, who had taken over the kingdom, were unequivocally the bad guys of the story, and an entire kingdom was under their rule. And it was a rule of adharma, meaning lack of dharma. And not for himself, not for his family, but for the kingdom. Dharma needed to be restored. Righteousness needed to be restored. And they had done everything. This was another role that Krishna played. He went many times to the cousins, trying to convince them, trying to change them. But when people turn their backs even on God and refuse to listen to voice of reason, voice of wisdom, voice of peace, and continue to stay committed to violence and exploitation and suppression and oppression and lack of dharma, the last resort becomes violence. That's on a big scale. You think about it, it's easier to think about on an individual scale. Imagine you're walking down the street and you see a man beating an old woman, trying to mug her, trying to steal her purse. Now, you may yell 100 times, get off her, get off her. But if he doesn't budge, there's no police around, you look around, anybody else can do anything, nobody can do anything. Eventually, if he doesn't budge, you may open your purse and find whatever you've got, if you got something that's hard, and come up and whack him on the head to get him to let go of the old lady. Because you understand, no matter how much of a non-violent person you are, that which you are doing to this man to get him to let the old lady go is what we would consider necessary violence. There's not a court of law in the world that would hold you accountable for that. And I don't think that there is a moral or ethical person who would hold you accountable for that. It's like, I'm a very, very, very staunch vegetarian and animal rights activist and vegan and non-user of animal products and vehemently opposed to animal, testing for products and all of that kind of stuff. And every once in a while in a question-answer session, especially with kids, somebody will say to me, well, if you were stranded in the middle of the forest and you were going to die of starvation, and your only way to survive was to, eat a squirrel, would you do it? Would you kill a squirrel? And I always say, I hope I could. I hope I could. Because to me, on a moral and ethical level, it would be the lesser of two evils. If option one is let myself die of hunger, if option two is kill a squirrel so I can stay alive, in my personal morality, and there may be people who disagree, but in my personal morality, I would feel okay. I would offer a lot of prayers for the squirrel. I would come to the banks of Ganga and do a puja for the squirrel. I would thank that squirrel in my prayers every day. But morally and ethically, I would be okay with the fact that I had sacrificed this squirrel so I could live. And therefore, we are given these teachings in Scripture, in which not just the war of the Mahabharata, but the entire Ramayana is mostly filled. The 14 years of Bhagwan Ram being in exile are filled with him confronting and killing demon after demon. Lots of the stories in scriptures are filled with powers of goodness, killing the asuras, the demons, the rakshas. We celebrate them. Diwali, Dashera, Navaratri. Each day is a celebration of a different demon who was killed by a different divine being. And so in spirituality, I think probably across religions, what we have is a model that says, if it is a force of goodness that is fighting against a force of darkness, in a case in which that force of darkness is causing even worse harm to other people. So it's not about just, I don't like you, but it's about every moment that you stay alive, you are causing more harm, more suffering, more death, more oppression, more exploitation, whatever it may be, to others. I've tried to reason with you, I've tried everything, and at the end of the day, this war is justified. Because it is the only way for the sake of the kingdom, the country, the planet, to restore Dharma. Now, that's the theology of it. That's the philosophy of it. I'm not specifically, personally advocating that. I'm just explaining to you how that philosophy and theology works. And of course, it's a slippery slope situation. It's what leads to jihad. It's what leads to all of the, it's what leads to the Crusades. It's what leads throughout history to people killing people of other religions in the name of somehow being light that is, destroying the darkness. And sadly, a lot of time, it's two different forces of darkness fighting each other, each thinking they are the force of light. It's really clear in scriptural stories, much less clear in what we're seeing in the world today. And it's why, for example, the Rohingya population is considered by the United Nations and by most bodies to be repressed peoples and refugees, and and that's not a war that is seen as a war of light against darkness. Unfortunately, being a quote-unquote spiritual person, even being a monastic, doesn't undo human nature. And to the extent that we get provoked, instigated into violence, into us and them mentality, we cause harm. So I know that's not a solution to it, but that's the why behind it, as far as I understand. And it's why people of faith, monastics, non-monastics, but it's why people of faith of every religion need to stand for peace and for an end to violence. Yeah. And it doesn't mean we don't whack the guy on the street who's harming the old lady. Because that we can see, it's clear. Entire groups of people, entire races, entire religions, entire ethnicities. This is wrong by any and every moral and ethical and spiritual standard that I know of. Yeah. Thanks. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful rest of your rainy evening. Enjoy it. And pray for the farmers. And I look forward to being together again tomorrow. And so much love to you all.